Hello. What a great crowd. Thanks for joining us today. So we have a distinguished panel of artists joining us, actors from our production of The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, and I thought maybe we'd start out by having actors introduce themselves. Mixolydia, do you want to start?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you.
I'm Mixolydia Tyler, and I play Portia in the play.
Hello, I'm Christopher Tester, and I play John Singer in the play. And I am J.W. Galdo, and I play Antonopoulos in the play.
Hi, I'm Madeline Adele Phillips, and I play Mick Kelly in the play.
My name's Gregory Myrie, and I play Biff Brannon in the play.
So of our 5 actors, we are thrilled to have two actors who are deaf, playing the 2 deaf roles in this production, and we are very fortunate to have the help of 2 ASL signers today. One, Amanda Firth, and Raphael Ray James. This is the first production that I have programmed at the Rep. I've been fortunate to have lived now in Little Rock for 11 months. But until recently, I was watching over a program astutely programmed by my predecessor. And 1718 is my first season to program. And when I was thinking about how to start the season, as Skip had mentioned, I was really interested in starting with a Southern story, although I'm not from the South. I'm actually from New York State, and then studied in New York City, and lived in Minneapolis, St. Paul for almost 20 years. I've always been fascinated by Southern writers. Some of my favorite authors have been Southern. Tennessee Williams is a particularly favorite playwright of mine. And I was thinking about what story to tell, and I remembered this play version of Carson McCullers' novel from 1940. And it seemed to me to be very appropriate piece. Seems even more appropriate now than ever before. When we programmed it, we didn't know quite where the world was going to be today, but it's a character study, I would say, of a group of individuals in a small mill town, small mill city, I should say, in Georgia. It's quite autobiographical. Carson McCullers, as Skip mentioned, was all of 23 when she wrote it. She published it in 1940, and it was an overnight sensation. She became the darling of the literary sect in New York, and then went on to write some other renowned pieces, including A Member of the Wedding, which was also made into a play. This particular story, Heart is a Lonely Hunter, her debut novel, was made into a film in the 60s, and between good friends, I can tell you I don't think it's a very good film. Sometimes Hollywood takes liberties, and they took some liberties with this piece, which I don't think did it justice. In 2005, Rebecca Gilman, originally from Alabama, also a Southern writer, who received the Harper Lee Award not too many years ago, adapted the novel into a play, and it premiered, commissioned by a company called the Acting Company, premiered in Atlanta at the Alliance Theater, and then in 2009 played New York City. I did not see that production, but I'm very tied in with the Acting Company. I worked there for a good many formative years. And I remembered this piece, and I thought it had so much to say about this, the world we're living in today. There are a group of what I would call misfits or eccentrics in this town, and the 4 principal characters, Dr. Copeland, an African-American physician, the only African-American physician in this entire community, who is very intelligent, very severe. Because of his strict principles, he has alienated his own family. He is very angry at the deeply racist society in which he finds himself. This is 1938, Georgia, towards the end of the Depression. Dr. Copeland in our production is played by a wonderful actor named James Foster Jr. Another character, one of these misfits, is named Jake Blount, and Jake is a wanderer, an alcoholic wanderer, working man, who rails against the injustices of capitalization. Two of the other characters, the main characters, are played by Madeline Adele Phillips and Gregory Myrie. So I thought, Madeline, would you please describe who Mick Kelly is?
Sure. So she begins to play as 13 and is 14 by the end of it. She's a tomboy living in a house with 6 children and a bunch of boarders who rent rooms from her family. Mr. Singer ends up being one of them, and that's how they meet and interact. She dreams of becoming a composer and loves Mozart and Beethoven, but you would never expect it, I think, when you first see her. So yeah, that's a little bit about Mick.
Right, Mick, a child from a very large family, impoverished, a middle child.
Yes.
Yes. And another one of the principal characters is a character named Biff Brannon. And Biff, recently widowed. Why don't we Gregory Myrie plays the role. Why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
Yeah, well, Biff is the proprietor of the local cafe or diner, which is kind of a centralized meeting place for a lot of people of the town. Recently, Jake has come to make my tavern his home, and Singer comes to the diner for the very first time. So these are the inciting incidents, or the impetus for where I am being a part of this story. And I think what's most interesting about Biff is that he has recently lost his wife, and he is really trying to figure out how the world works, who he is, who these other people are, how they all fit together, and he's a watcher, he's a thinker, and he's very curious, many, many years ahead of his time.
Each of these characters, if you've ever had the chance to read the novel, it's a lovely novel, and I suggest you read it if you haven't. It's a beautiful piece of work. The play, of course, a different medium. You can't do everything. You can't tell the entire story of the novel, which is a significant length in a play. But each of these characters could be their own play. And one of the things that I was so thrilled about in terms of this particular opportunity, these different stories come together. I loved the fact there was a coming-of-age story. I loved the fact there's an African-American family story. And Mixie, if you talk a little bit, Mixie plays Dr. Copeland's daughter. Would you talk a little bit about that family dynamic?
Yes. There's, as you spoke before, about Dr. Copeland's views are very different from his children's views. And they are much of the mentality of being a part of the community. If you could kind of define the two, they're more an integrationist kind of ideal, wanting to fit in, wanting to be a part, and he's more about fighting against that and having our own and being self-educated and to be professionals, kind of like the talented 10th thing, and they don't want to do that. And so that causes strife between him and his children, and the journey of the play is this coming together of the minds that starts to happen because they both are forced to deal with the fact that the way that they see the world, it doesn't work. You can't be all this way and you can't be all the other way. You've got to be able to fight against some things, and you've got to be able to not fight against some things. And so they kind of start to see each other differently over the course of the play. Mm-hmm.
So it's this tapestry of stories that comes together. And the remarkable thing when you think about Carson McCullers, all of 23 years old when she wrote this, she had a wisdom beyond her years. Richard Wright, who was a very respected writer, African-American writer, he wrote Native Son and Black Boy. He wrote a review in the New Republic when this book was published, and I'd like to quote it. To me, the most impressive aspect of this book is the astonishing humanity that enables a white writer, for the first time in Southern fiction, to handle Negro characters with as much ease and justice as those of her own race. This cannot be accounted for stylistically or politically. It seems to stem from an attitude towards life, which enables Miss McCullers to rise above the pressures of her environment and embrace white and black humanity in one sweep of apprehension and tenderness. Carson McCullers had an amazing ability to get inside the minds of her characters. One of the most telling examples of that is the central figure of John Singer. All of these characters gravitate towards John Singer. John Singer is a deaf man in this community, and he, unlike the other characters, have found their we of me. That's a phrase that Carson McCullers used in A Member of the Wedding, the we of me. And it's an idea that runs through all of her work. What she believed is one of the first things as human beings we need to do is we need to discover who we are, and then where do we belong? Who is the we of me? And in this particular work, the characters Dr. Copeland and Mick Kelly and Biff Brannon, they don't have a we of me. They're searching for a serious connection. John Singer has found his we of me. It's a character by the name of Spiros Antonopoulos, and J.W. Guido plays that part. Maybe, J.W., would you talk to us a little about who Spiros Antonopoulos is?
Yes. Antonopoulos is a small role, but has a big impact on John Singer's life. In the hearing community, it's very small. There's only 2 deaf individuals there, and they rely on each other for communication, for enjoyment in life. And we've been together about 10 years and so forth, played games, cooked, shared life together. And then the moment comes when the role of Antonopoulos his health becomes deteriorated, and he becomes separated from John Singer.
Mm-hmm. It's a really fascinating relationship between these 2 characters. They are the only 2 deaf people in this town, and they bond in a way they become each other's worlds. They are the we of me. When Spiros becomes ill, Antonopoulos is taken away to an institution, leaving John in this community. Even though he's lived in it for 10 years, suddenly he's thrust in the community in a way that he never has been before, and he encounters these other characters. So Singer is the focus in many ways of the play. All of these characters gravitate towards Singer, and it's a remarkable, remarkable character. This was a time when deaf people were referred to as dummies, 1938. And Carson McCullers had never met a deaf person before. And she created this out of her imagination, and it's a seminal portrait of a deaf person because John Singer is independent, he's kind, he's generous, he's intelligent, he's someone who in fact takes a leadership role in friendships. It's a magnificent character, and I'd love to have Christopher Tester talk a little bit about Singer and playing Singer.
As John mentioned, the character of John Singer is unique in the book as well as in the play. One big part is there is no story about his upbringing. You don't know how he arrived there in Georgia. He's not originally from Georgia. He's originally from Chicago, Illinois. We know that, did he go to a deaf school? Yes. And I've lived in Georgia for 10 years now as John Singer and with Antonopoulos. And there's only those small details, that's all you have at the beginning of the play. So it allowed me to create an image of him, but at the same time, looking at how he fits within society. He has a good job. He reads and writes. He communicates with others by writing back and forth. He has money. He buys things. He's living a comfortable life. And it's in a very small town. In the deaf community in general, there's a strong sense that and not necessarily in other communities, but a strong sense of communicating and not being alone, but being with others that are of like mind. So the fact that John Singer decides to leave his community in Chicago to come into this place, I'm sure that Chicago is a much larger deaf community than to move here to this small community. You don't have that fact. You don't know what that is. So it's a very interesting, unusual assumption that is made there. Not all deaf people would have done such. Antonopoulos, once he is taken away, John Singer suddenly finds himself at a loss. Not really lost per se, because he still has Antonopoulos in his life. He's just not physically present. But in spirit, he's there. He knows he's in the hospital. He can go visit. And he can still socialize in the community and meet new people at the same time. He doesn't really invest himself into these individuals from the community. He doesn't give them any emotional investment. He listens to their stories, he supports them in other ways, but never opens up to them as a human being himself. Those characters, in turn, open up to John Singer and invest themselves in him. So it's a beautiful story of how he listens, and you hear their story through John Singer that you probably would have never heard otherwise. They would have not done so with other people in the community. And so his story comes through letter writing to his best friend. His emotional state, his feelings, his responses, he writes in letters. And those letters are for Antonopoulos. And Antonopoulos, his friend, doesn't even read and write. So that's sort of the irony of his expression on paper to someone that doesn't even read and write, but that's the way he's able to pacify those that we have met within himself. And it's a very interesting part of the story.
Right. Right. So I think one of the things the story has to offer, and there's an irony in that this John Singer, a deaf man, is a fantastic listener. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of the story. He is there for his friends. I mean, I think they are friends, but they are no substitute for his dear friend, Spiros Antonopoulos. An aspect of Carson McCullers' work that we talked about a little bit, which I think is really important, is Carson McCullers' insight into the nature of a loving relationship. And I think that's really important in terms of these stories. Carson McCullers, I think, she realized that in a loving relationship, we all desire to be loved and to be loved back equally, in strength, simultaneously. And Carson McCullers, even at the tender age of 23, realized that's really not how things work. At any given moment, even if you're a long-term love relationship, at one moment you're the lover, and the next you're the beloved. And for Carson McCullers, the thing that was most important was actually to be the one that loved, or that loves, rather than be the object of affection. And I think that's key here. I'm wondering if any of our panelists, any of the actors would like to pick up on that theme?
Yeah. Well, from the perspective of Mick, she has this huge family, and you don't see her other siblings in the play. You see them in the book, but she's around them all the time. She's kind of raising the younger ones. So there is, she has a family that I would say definitely loves her, but there's a line from the novel where she says it's, she's surrounded by all these people, but she still feels so lonely. And she refers to this lovely concept of having an inside room and an outside room in her mind. And the outside room is where everyone else is, and she can't really think, and she can't really get in touch with this artistic, poetic sensibility that she has inside her through the appreciation of the music. But when she meets Mr. Singer, she feels that he can understand the music, even though he's a deaf man, and just feels like he understands that. And she he really does become, I think, her we of me, and he's so connected to the music for her. It's like this thing she loved is finally personified in a living person, and having that is everything to her. And I think for all the characters in the play, it also focuses on what happens when we lose that we of me, and that's where a lot of the depth of the story unfolds.
Well, I think that picking up from what John said, I think that we as individuals, we want to connect with others. And I think that one of the things that we don't really remind ourselves of often enough is that that other person has just as much going on as we do. That, you know, we all struggle. Of course, there are peaks and valleys, but everybody's dealing with their own thing. And what we often forget is that each other are our greatest assets in dealing with that. You know, a lot of these characters have lost something, and I think they're subconsciously or instinctively reaching out to each other to try to fill that void, to try to reconnect, and to have a sense of self. With that being said, I have to say that this novel, and it being written when she was 23, is, I mean, it's Shakespearean. I mean, the fact, I mean, she's in these people's heads, and I know everybody on this stage and a couple of the other actors that John mentioned, you read the novel, and it's a gift, but they're so intricate and layered and vertical, and she is in their minds. It's not just the way they look, the way they talk. He's loud. He's, you know, it's every little peccadillo that each character has that's either driving them crazy or it's keeping them going. But these are all themes that are so far ahead of their time. I mean, I can't even fathom how she believed that she could put that book out with some of the themes that are in it and expect it to be received. It's baffling to me, the thoughts that they're considering. And, you know, I can speak for myself in particular because my character is a big part of that. And how she understood what he was trying to figure out is beyond me. But the things that he is considering, as I said at the top, I feel like are way ahead of their time.
So this idea of making connections and our deep desire to make connections, sometimes we get in our own way. And that's certainly true in some of these characters. Mixie, do you want to talk a little bit about, I think both Dr. Copeland and his children, I think they yearn for a better relationship, but they themselves get in the way of that.
Yeah, I think that there's a constant kind of coming together and repelling and throughout the play until the very end, honestly, between Portia and Dr. Copeland. She keeps revisiting this attempt for to reach out and love. I mean, I think Portia's need, and I think that's beautiful that you said that earlier too, that there are moments, I challenge you if you come see the play, every moment there's a time where a character, because of Mr. Singer, learns how to love the other person, to be selflessly giving of love and attention that they don't normally have that to give. And I think Portia's the one character who does that throughout and is continually getting repelled from her father, and she is constantly trying to do this tug of war with him. And I think that it finally there's a reward there by the end, because he has realized that love is what he misses the most when he deals with his own loss through the course of the play, and that his daughter is the one that's been trying to give it to him all along. And so that is a fun journey to go on, and it's fun to see each character kind of learn how to do that because of the love and attention they've been given by this character.
Singer and Antonopoulos, that relationship is so key to the play, and yet we only have Antonopoulos on stage for 2 scenes. Sometimes I wish, we could do a 2-parter and have Antonopoulos more a part of our story. But that relationship is key in terms of setting Singer on the course of meeting these other individuals, and also, I think, a key to understanding the dynamics of relationships as Carson McCullers saw them. I think, don't you think it's fair to say, Christopher, that, that Singer is very happy being the lover, and Antonopoulos is really very content in being the beloved?
I would think so, yes. I would agree with that. John Singer likes to take care of and be able to provide that care. It is something, and so Antonopoulos is a receiver of that. And you can see through the story that he does give some care to other characters throughout the story, but even in that caretaking, it's not at the level that he did for Antonopoulos. But that is his desire of him to be a caretaker, to share that love in that manner. But it's in a very platonic way, instead of that cherished way that he has with Antonopoulos. So the second part of that I wanted to mention about John Singer is the amazing power that he has with his autonomous self. He makes decisions about himself, to speak or not to speak, to sign or not to sign, to write or not to write. That is very powerful for a deaf individual at that time. If I want to, I will. If I don't, I won't. And that is very empowering compared to today in the deaf community, who struggles with language sometimes. Is it recognized or is it not? Do I tell the doctor, the family? Do I want to tell them that, doctors are saying you need to do this with your child. You don't teach them signs, or you do teach them signs. In the educational system, if I made the decision, I'm not going to speak anymore in the play. That's a very powerful part of John Singer as well as a cultural aspect.
Right. Right, and I think that the gift that this play gives us, I think it's a story that is rather quiet in some ways. It's a character study, and I think it gains power over the course of the 2 hours, and you get to the point where at the end, you realize that not only has it elicited a sense of sympathy for these marginalized characters, but you have, even more importantly, a sense of empathy for these eccentric, marginalized people. And one of the things that I think is so profound today is that we seem, as a culture, to be marginalizing more and more people, and seeing people as the other, or demonizing others. And I think this play has a beautiful message of pointing out that we have all these needs in common. One other thing that I think is worth mentioning in terms of Antonopoulos and Singer and his relationship with the other characters, there's a crippling loneliness that these people feel, and Singer certainly feels that after Antonopoulos is sent away. And all these characters come to Singer. He's their confidant, he's their confessor. And whenever they ask questions of Singer, personal questions, he pushes them away. Time and time again, whenever they get too close, he'll push them away. Christopher, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
You are right. There is one way that John Singer, he does not give back to them. He provides that support, financially, a listening ear, except for the personal reference. He does not give of himself at all. Materialistic things he doesn't have a problem with, but that self thing he holds back. They ask personal questions, he pulls away. And if it's not too personal, he may respond, but the minute it gets below surface, he pulls away immediately. He doesn't express himself in that manner. And the other characters don't really catch it at all. They don't realize he's holding back with them. And that's an interesting twist, that because he's such a strong listening ear to them, they don't analyze his lack of responding to the personality of who are you.
In a way, it's even this crippling loneliness that Singer feels at the loss of Antonopoulos. He could have done something about that in a way. He could have made a choice to give more of himself. He could have had more of a give and take with these other people who were so eager to be with him. He chooses not to. That's another really interesting part about the story. Is it because he feels isolated? One of the reasons is because he feels isolated from them because they're hearing and he's not, that he's uncomfortable in some profound way, in that community. It's a mystery. Carson McCullers is very smart because she gives you some information, but she asks you to use your imagination in other ways. And I think, for example, Christopher mentioned earlier that we don't know much about Singer prior to the start of the novel, the start of the play. And there's a poetic reason for that. Singer says, "My life was not real before I met Antonopoulos." It was as if nothing that happened before he met Antonopoulos was important to him. He found somebody, and I think it's important to note, one of the first things we talk about, what is this relationship between these two men? Is it sexual? And all of us thought it's not. And certainly in the novel I had that feeling as well. It's spiritual. It's a spiritual connection that they feel with each other. They understand each other in a profound way because they're both deaf in a hearing world.
Let me add another thing. Even in the book, it's not in the play, but in the novel. As John mentioned, you can't include everything. But in the novel, there is a point in time in the story near the end where John meets other deaf individuals in the story who actually sign, but John himself doesn't even make that we of me connection with them. He platonically interacts and then leaves. And it must be deaf only for him to make that connection? No. But Antonopoulos was his we of me. Other deaf people were not. So it's more than just that. He still held back. And you can't add more of that, that character to the play. But in the book, bringing out that play, what exactly was, and I tried to show that in the play. We're friends because we're both deaf. We're not friends just because we're both deaf. And that we are friends. It just happened that we are both deaf.
Mm-hmm. And in the play, we never really see Antonopoulos before he's ill. That's also, Antonopoulos probably at one point was higher functioning than he is when we see him in the play. By the time we meet in the play, we know he's been ill. John Singer says to his cousin who sends him away, it's not his fault. He's been sick. It's not his fault. So in some ways, the relationship between the two of them, yes, it's a caretaking relationship. I think probably at one point it was more of a give and take than it is when we get to see the two of them. That they've been friends for 10 years, living together for 10 years. I imagine probably early on in the relationship it was more of a give and take. But certainly by the time we get to know them, Antonopoulos is not in the position really to give much, but he needs a great deal of care. The original production, which I mentioned, and I did not see, but the original production received a lot of attention, some of it positive, some of it negative. It was named one of the 10 best, Time magazine named it one of the 10 best plays of 2009. But in that original production, a decision was made to cast the two deaf roles with hearing actors. And that was a cause célèbre. There were pickets outside the theater. There was a lot of anger in the deaf community over that. And I knew that when we were going to do this play, if we were going to do it, I wanted to do it with deaf actors. And I called a friend of mine in New York who's a casting director, and she had worked with a play called Tribes, which also has a deaf role in it. And I asked her, do you think we could find 2 deaf actors who could play these parts, who would be willing to come to Little Rock for a couple of months? Her answer was yes. And so we announced the play, and we put out a casting call. And interestingly enough, she found about 50 actors who are deaf around the country who were interested in playing these parts. You know, some of them weren't right for whatever reason, in terms of their type or their age, but there's an enormous amount of talent in the deaf community. And one of the things that was fascinating through the audition process was auditioning many of these actors were not in New York. So I was auditioning actors through Skype, which was really fascinating because, you know, here I was 3,000 miles away from them, they're deaf, I don't understand sign language. It was a really interesting process. Fortunately, there are a number of wonderful actors in New York who are deaf, and JW and Christopher auditioned, and I just immediately felt that they were the 2 that needed to play these parts, and happily they said yes. But JW actually runs a theater company in New York, the New York Theater for the Deaf. JW, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I've been the artistic director for the New York Deaf Theater for 5 years now, and that company is a not-for-profit organization that gives an opportunity for deaf talent, and it includes actors and crew and stage designers, directors, all the various parts of the theater. And it shows on stage, you know, off-stage Broadway type things, and it gives that opportunity to the deaf community.
So you and Christopher have worked together before?
Yes, we have. I met him through this company, actually.
Right. And 2 actors in our panel have worked at the Rep before. Mixie was in Raising the Sun. What year was that, Mixie?
2011.
Right, so a couple years ago. And then Gregory was in the Scottish play. I guess we're not in a theater, so we can call him Macbeth. He was in Macbeth. And Gregory now is a Little Rock-based actor.
Yes, yeah, I am. Thank you. You're my people. You're my people now. I do want to say one quick thing about these 2 gentlemen, if I may.
Sure.
I think that we traditionally think of acting as speaking, right? I mean, that's just what we just kind of fall into as we go through the world. I mean, we're watching TV. Even Shakespeare, they would go to hear a play, right? So we think of them as speaking. And a lot of people may wonder, what does a really talented deaf actor look like? And we have 2 amazing examples in this show. So if you're curious about what that looks like, come see it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I have to also point out that, you know, the casting was no sense of largesse on my part. It's very self-serving. Because the fact of the matter is I wanted a strong production, and I knew that we were going to get, if we had deaf actors playing these parts, we would have an authenticity that you could never have with a hearing actor. You know, Christopher and JW have a lifelong understanding of what it means to be deaf in a hearing world. And they don't need to pretend not to hear. They don't need to pretend to lip read. So they really kept all of us super honest during the process, you know, and I had never directed a deaf actor before. I'd produced a play with a deaf actor, but I'd never directed a deaf actor. And, you know, sometimes I would find myself saying and doing really stupid things in rehearsal because it's just something I'm not used to. You know, just in terms of staging or blocking, you know, if you're having a conversation with a deaf actor, they have to see the other person's lips, right? If they're lip reading. So, you know, and sometimes, you know, in plays you can fudge it a lot in terms of staging. And here's a situation you really couldn't because of the reality of what's on stage. So we have a brief video we're going to show, and then we'd love to have a question and answer period.
How you doing? You from around here? Me neither. The hell of a town, though, ain't it?
Daddy! There's a man here about the room.
Will Kelly.
He's one of them deaf mutes.
I am a deaf mute, but I read lips and understand one that says in English, do not shout. I wonder how long it would have taken me to figure that out. This sure is a lonely town, you know it? I'd up and leave for sure if it wasn't for you. I think you're the only one around here who understands the thing I say.
So that was put together by our friends at Cranford. So would you be happy to take any questions you might have?
I'd love to know more about each actor's background and how you found them and what all we've seen Gregory in. You do have a familiar face. I think I can probably guess a few of them, but this was wonderful. Thank you.
You'd like to hear from?
I've been working and performing in New York for 13 years now, and I was really honored to do Raisin in the Sun here with one of your alumni here at Clinton, the Clinton School, Spirit Tricky, who's now married, Spirit Tawfiq, but she graduated from the Clinton Center and was our dramaturg on that show. And I think the last thing, I work at Lincoln Center Education now full time, and so I do a lot more television in New York. I was on season 6 of Homeland, so that was like the last thing I did. Oh, I keep doing that.
Love you. Sorry about that.
It's like a reflex.
So Madeline?
Okay. I've lived in New York City for almost 15 years now, and I've been doing theater off and on throughout that time. Most of my theater work has been with the New York Deaf Theater. I also work as an interpreter trainer, and most of my work is related to interpreting, and then whenever there's an opportunity for theater, I get involved or apply for it. And I do consulting work with language translation from script to ASL or from English, British Sign Language, both. So I do that as well as a consultant for the past 15 years. And I'm excited to be here in Little Rock. I grew up and became an actor through the frustration of not being able to get in theater because I was not hearing or speaking. And I went to college in Rochester Institute of Technology, RIT, in upstate New York. And they have a deaf section in TID. They had a deaf theater program, so I majored in theater. And I was a graduate and began to tour with the theater. And it was frustrating, but it gave me an opportunity. I moved to New York City and started to work with the New York Deaf Theater. And so the people that are from there don't have the same experience of how I went through it and the opportunities that were given. Acting, art directing, performing in ASL. I can't hear you, Portia.
Going to grad school?
Oh, yes, I forgot to mention that. I wrote an ASL book out there. My book is out there for grade school.
I actually really want to get that book. So I've lived in New York City for the past 7 years, 4 of which I was attending school. I went to Marymount Manhattan College, got a BFA in acting there, and the last 3 I've just been auditioning and working professionally. I keep ending up in the South. My last show was in Kentucky, in like Appalachia, doing Dracula of all things. But I'm excited to be here. I've wanted to work with the Rep before. I was actually looking for an email from Peter, who I believe is the resident he does the casting here. He didn't do it in New York, but like I was looking for an email he sent me, and I found one from 2 years ago, I think, which was for the production of Macbeth that Greg was in, of me submitting, being like, "Hi, I'm an actress in New York, and I'd like to submit." So I'm happy I'm here now.
Was that 2 years ago? What year?
It was like 2015.
What year is this? No, okay, yeah. I think it was 2 years ago. I think so. Yeah, so I've been here ever since. Once I graduated, I got my master's degree in theater, film, and television from UCLA. And when I graduated, I was immediately, well, I did a bunch of TV and film, and everybody, you know, blah blah blah. But what I did the most of was I was on a soap opera for a number of years, Days of Our Lives, for a number of years, yeah. And then when I was done with that, I did the whole TV show scene. You know, I did 2 episodes on this and 3 episodes on that, blah blah blah, movies and stuff like that. But I've always wanted to go back to the stage. I mean, it's my first love. It's the only actor's medium left. It's what made me fall in love with acting. And there is no theater in LA, and I know because I started a theater company, and gosh, we got amazing reviews and nobody in the seats. So, you know, I was trying to figure out what to do about that, and I was shooting a movie in Michigan, and I was in a hotel for 3 months, and so I had basically moved into a suitcase anyway. So I came to Little Rock to stay with a friend while I figured out if I was going to go to New York or LA. And I just saw that there was a theater here, and I mean, it was just on a whim. I just emailed Peter, and he said, well, we've already auditioned for the show, but, you know, you can come in, and the rest is history. But yeah, I've been here ever since. I cannot tell you, John, earmuffs, I cannot tell you how happy I am to be working at the Rep again. I mean, I've always, this is a dream come true, to be in a city that supports a theater like this and that is doing shows like this one. I mean, it's an absolute dream come true. So I've stayed. I do host a TV show that's based out of Little Rock as well. So I'm a Little Rock fan now. I moved to Little Rock to work more than I ever have in my life. So thank you.
What's the TV show?
Oh, yes. All right. Especially after you see the play. No, I host a TV show on Transportation Nation Network called Truckerville, where I travel around the world covering truck shows. Yeah. So, you know, it's a lot of this, trucks. Yeah, I use this voice all the time.
Yes, in the back there.
This is a question for you, John. You've been here 11 months, but this is your first directing job at the Rep, right?
Yes, sir.
So I'm wondering, did you gain any new impressions of the Rep as a director directing at the Rep, or did you learn anything about the Rep that you'd like to share with us as a first-time director at the Rep?
Well, I think I knew going in that the staff was very hardworking. And that's administrative staff, that's production staff. You know, it's amazing what the Rep does for as few people who work there. Our scene shop, 3 people. Our costume shop, 3 people. The tech director is also the resident set designer. The production manager is also a resident costume designer. It's, you know, everyone works so hard. I knew that before I went into rehearsal, but there's a special appreciation, I think, when you go into rehearsal and you realize. I am blessed to work with colleagues who are remarkably dedicated, and that became even more clear when I put on a directing hat.
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for this presentation. I find it very enlightening. I went to the show last night, and I was profoundly struck by the topical nature of a lot of aspects of the play. Things that, or issues or problems that we thought we had overcome are now, I'm not going to get too specific, but they're all coming back. A lot of the bad stuff. And the rise of fascism, bigotry, and other issues that y'all addressed. And I would just like to get y'all's thoughts on the topical nature, the currency of that play. Thank you.
I think that this play is a testament to when we don't continually have these conversations and reevaluate our stance on these issues, we are doomed to suffer the consequences of that. And so I'm very thankful for this play because it does bring up topics that are uncomfortable and reminds us that we become comfortable and aware of each other when we are talking and thinking in this way that these characters do and journey into. And so thank you for saying that, because I think that it's very timely, even though we're set in 1938 and it's very Southern, more Southern than Little Rock in some ways, that the issues and the journeys that these characters take are important for us to look at ourselves and see what we think and where we stand.
I would also like to add, since you saw the show last night, there is one scene between two characters. It's Dr. Copeland and Jake Blount, and they both really want, in some ways, the same thing. Like, they want equality for everyone, but there's this beautiful scene where they really are seeing eye to eye, but they can't agree on the how. And I think that's something we see a lot, where people ask, what can I do? And they're like, no, this is the right way. You can't do this action. You need, like, they're not going to listen to this protest. You need to do it this way. And I hope that their failure to reach an understanding together is something that inspires people to try and find a way to, breach those gaps and to make it a better world. And empathy is just, we've said that word a lot, but I really think that is a theme that is never irrelevant.
There was one other person who had a question before you wrap it up.
This is directed to JW. Who is your audience? And I just can't imagine going to a deaf theater play. How do you do that? Who is your audience?
Excellent. New York City has many different theaters. One of them has the opportunity of deaf talent. The other one, we give a full accessibility for audience. It doesn't matter who's there, deaf or hearing. It's full accessibility, sign language, verbal language. And there's different communication accessibility needs that we address to make sure that the theater is on an equal level for everybody's inspiration. Also, that includes captioning. It includes ASL and also spoken English. So you choose which one that's best for you. We have many different opportunities here for that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure sharing our thoughts with you.